Just before midnight on the 24th of November, 2025, on a muddy makeshift runway near Dnipro, the stealth drone was pulled out of a hangar as dark as a tomb. Its fuselage was coated in radar-absorbing paint. Under the dim yellow lights, it was almost nothing more than a warped shadow against the concrete. The ground crew locked the pylons and plugged in the final cables to the inertial navigation unit. When the electric motor began to spin, the airframe trembled lightly, then slid into the night. Its nose pointed straight northeast, toward the Russian brain that was circling, unaware it had already been chosen. Hours later, in the skies south of Rostov, the A-50U mainstay continued its steady orbit, in absolute confidence that nothing Ukraine possessed could ever reach it. 2 weeks before the 25th of November, 2025, a little after 9 in the evening in Kyiv, inside a freezing concrete bunker, a group of Ukrainian officers stared at Russian strike logs as if replaying the same attack trajectory over and over again. Night after night, Ka-101, Kh-22, and Caliber missiles slammed into the power grid, fuel depots, factories, and every time they rewound the map, they saw the same figure behind it all, the A-50U mainstay circling deep inside Russian territory. It never exploded itself, but every explosion began with its eye. Weeks earlier, Ukraine had already used long-range UAVs to burn prototype A-60 and A-100LL aircraft at Taganrog. But those were only shadows preparing the stage for the real brain, still flying in the sky, the operational A-50U. When they overlaid data from multiple consecutive nights, the trajectory appeared almost perfectly identical. The same pre-dawn time window, the same altitude, a patrol path wavering by only a few hundred meters. The A-50U flew far too deep inside Russia, beyond the reach of Buk M1, NASAMS, or Patriot, nearly invulnerable. On the evening of the 19th of November, just before midnight, the commander swept aside all dispersed defensive options. No more chasing individual missiles, no risking clashes with escorting fighters. Ukraine would strike straight at the head controlling everything, with a single stealth drone, silent as a ghost, its flight path drawn to slip precisely into the blind zone behind the A-50U. After switching to cruise mode, the drone climbed steadily through layers of cold air, the altimeter needle sliding past 7,500, then 8,000 meters. At stable revolutions, its thermal signature dropped so low that against weather clutter, it became nothing more than a faint, unclassifiable smear. Inside the command bunker near Kyiv, its route appeared as a thin arc stretching northeast, hugging the edge of S-400 coverage. With every navigation update, the trajectory shifted by only 0.1 to 0.2 degrees to keep the drone inside a pre-calculated low-energy corridor. When the drone quietly crossed the border at altitude, the western Russian sky was still choked with electronic interference, low clouds, and air defense alert corridors operating in their familiar rhythm. On Russian radar screens, it appeared only as a blurred speck blended into winter weather noise, too unstable to confirm as a target, yet not clear enough to trigger alarm procedures. No station could be sure it was a threat, or merely clutter on the screen. At the same time, inside the Ukrainian bunker, the senior officer watched a data strip that remained eerily flat. With every navigation update, the drone adjusted by only 0.1 to 0.2 degrees to cling to the scan boundary, like a climber placing fingertips one by one on slick rock at the edge of a chasm, where half a step off meant vanishing from the map. As the bunker clock crept toward 0230, the sky ahead of the drone thickened with dense cloud bands, appearing on the infrared channel as interwoven dark masses. In the distance, more than 100 kilometers away, the A-50U banked into its familiar turn. That bank widened its radar beam southward, but behind the tail it contracted, creating a shallow energy depression as thin as a knife slit. The drone immediately dropped a few hundred more meters, slipping down along the edge of that blade. On the bunker screens, wind speed, humidity, and airframe vibration jumped continuously. One officer whispered, "It's riding the edge." In the boundary zone, where radar energy had already decayed, reflected signals were no longer stable enough to form a clean track. That was where the drone had to live. Not long after, The onboard system began to pick up the familiar X-band frequency rhythm reflected from the 360-degree surveillance radar disc atop the A-50U. Instead of charging straight in, the drone pulled into a wide arc, slowly closing a circle around the target. On the map, the geometry of an aerial kill box gradually took shape. The A-50U at the center like a glowing brain in the darkness, the drone a cold blade circling in from behind. An error of a few dozen meters could ruin everything, yet over more than half an hour of approach, its flight path fluctuated within just 3 to 5 meters, near absolute precision as it closed on the most self-confident brain in the Russian sky. It was a quietly upgraded branch of the jet-powered UAV line previously used to strike the A-60 and A-100LL at Taganrog. The only difference was that this time, the target was no longer an aircraft parked on the ground, but the brain circling overhead. Inside the A-50U cabin, the clock hand ticked over to 0231. Another radar sweep passed across the display, returning nothing but familiar signals, terrain clutter, distant civilian aircraft, and tiny gaps between scan cycles. Several consecutive nights on duty had left the operators drained, their sense of alertness worn thin. The A-50U was flying deep inside Russian territory, at an altitude close to 10,000 meters, with Su-35S escorts and an enormous radar dome. In their minds, the idea that a Ukrainian UAV could reach this far was completely absurd. That very repetition, identical flight paths, identical turn times, was what made the A-50U predictable. For many nights in a row, Ukraine had traced this pattern: stable altitude, the bank angle as the aircraft entered its turn, the radar gap created when the antenna shifted orientation. Every curve layered onto the Kyiv map pointed to the same weakness. At the same moment, inside the Kyiv bunker, the drone's approach path stood out clearly on the screen. A faint track following from behind, holding a separation of a few dozen meters, riding the edge of radar energy that was steadily fading. The S-400, S-300 belts, and the Su-35S pursuit zones appeared outside like tightening rings. The drone had slipped through all of them along a corridor so narrow it felt like crawling along a blade. Inside the A-50U cabin, the duty commander leaned toward a round window, seeing only a dense sea of clouds beneath the wing. Everything looked normal, even the flickering signals on the coordinate panel. That very familiarity made it easy for the aircraft to mask the footprints of the entity stalking it from behind. Meanwhile, in Kyiv, the drone's approach appeared clean and precise. The curve tightening, the thermal trace of the Shmel-M radar disc atop the A-50U visible even as a distant blur. The drone held steady altitude, slicing through thin cloud layers, tracking the heat point of the rotating radar disc like a glowing spine far ahead. To the onboard system, the A-50U was no longer an aircraft, but a structure of parameters. Radar mast, rotational moment, the gap behind the tail. Inside the Russian operator's cabin, the radar continued its steady sweep. The compartment was quiet, filled only with fan noise and familiar background static. They did not know that behind their flight path, a faint presence was closing in second by second. The drone silently closed the remaining arc, maintaining an almost perfect line along the boundary of weakened radar energy. A differential zone where a single slip would be enough to reveal it. An infrared square was drawn by the system around the A-50U, distance parameters steadily shrinking. In Kyiv, the infrared feed sharpened. The A-50U appeared as a bright red thermal streak against the dark sky. The drone was entering the dead zone, the area behind the tail, almost entirely outside scan coverage. Only a few kilometers remained. A small error could collapse the entire plan. The A-50U continued to fly with blind confidence, believing itself beyond Ukraine's reach. Behind it, in the darkness, the seemingly invulnerable giant was being steadily constricted by a silent blade, concentrating all its explosive force for a single moment. As the A-50U began its familiar turn near 0236, the airframe banked only slightly, just like hundreds of patrol loops before it. The Shmel-M radar disc on its back accelerated, the beam sweeping deep to the south. That very motion shaved a thin slice from the cone behind the tail, creating an energy depression, a small dark pocket in the sky that no one inside the cabin ever considered. Inside the command bunker near Kyiv, The dark zone stood out clearly on the sensor overlay. The radar cone outline faded, while the drone appeared as a cold dot tucked neatly behind the A-50U's tail. The infrared feed showed the AWACS as a massive heat source, the hot halo of the rotating radar disk steady and bright. At the moment when those aboard felt safest, the blade was already at the nape of the neck, unseen. Beneath the drone's belly, the weapons bay opened. The short-range standoff warhead, slim-bodied, coated in radar reflection-reducing material, slid free, touching the launch rail. The onboard computer ran a final check. Distance, closure speed, approach angle, winds at an altitude near 10,000 meters. Everything matched the geometry the Kyiv team had built over many nights. A strike at the brain rather than the muscles. The launch command was sent without celebration, just a brief instruction over the link. Outside, the warhead left the rail with a jolt, then its miniature motor flared. It surged forward inside the tail-dead zone, hugging the aerodynamic wake behind the A-50U like a surgical blade pressed along a spine. On Nebo M or Gamma DE screens, if anyone had zoomed into exactly the right cell, all they would have seen was a weak speck of noise flashing once before sinking into the blind area. Inside the A-50U cabin, the shift was nearing its end. A few operators saved recordings, closed logs, adjusted safety harnesses, feeling the familiar vibration of the airframe. In the lower corner of the main display, a tiny anomaly flickered and vanished before the human eye could truly register it. If there was any warning at all, it was only a brief shudder, quickly dismissed by exhausted minds as noise. The real impact came seconds later. The warhead struck the A-50U's fuselage near the base of the radar mast, exactly where wiring bundles, power feeds, and processing modules were densely packed. The metal skin was pierced, the shockwave drove deep into the cabin, and then the explosive charge detonated from within. From tens of kilometers away, infrared cameras saw only a bright point bloom, then swell into a fireball that engulfed the AWACS's upper fuselage. The Shmel M radar disc was torn from its mount, shattering into dozens of glowing metal fragments, spinning in turbulent airflow. The A-50U's fuselage broke at its weakest point, a column of flame racing along its length, drawing a long streak of light across the black sky. Nebo M and Gamma DE stations around Rostov registered an abnormal plasma cloud at an altitude of around 10 kilometers. On control screens, the track-coated A-50U jittered wildly for a few beats, then vanished, leaving behind a cold void, as if someone had just pulled the plug on the airborne brain. When the Su-35S escorts circled back to the area minutes later, there was nothing left to protect. Through night vision optics, where the A-50U had flown, there was only a column of smoke spiraling down into the cloud layer. Beneath it, small points of light falling slowly. Seats, fuselage fragments, and the remains of the brain that had once guided KH-101, KH-22, and Caliber strikes. The report they sent back to headquarters was compressed into a single idea. The flying command center had turned into a rain of metal. Inside the Kyiv bunker, the A-50U symbol on the digital map flashed once and went dark, the dense patrol loops it had drawn for months ending at that exact point. There was no applause. Instead came the sense that a vast gray zone had opened in the skies over eastern Russia, a zone where from now on every strike against Ukraine would have to proceed without eyes overhead. From the perspective of any air defense officer, this was not merely one aircraft shot down, but the moment an integrated radar network lost the part of its brain that could see far and coordinate, leaving behind only raw, unfiltered reflections. When the sun rose over the Rostov steppe on the morning of the 25th of November, infrared satellite imagery captured an abnormal, elongated burn scar, larger than any Russian military aircraft crash recorded in years. Mi-8 helicopters, fire trucks, and area sealing forces appeared in heavy concentration. The media spoke only of a technical malfunction, never once naming the airframe type. But across Russia's air defense network, the consequences surfaced immediately. Over the next 48 hours, S-400 and S-300 batteries responded markedly slower to long-range UAVs and cruise missiles. Without an airborne platform to fuse signals, each unit was forced to process targets on its own, using standalone radar. Ukrainian firepower punched through multiple layers of defense that had previously been sealed tight. One ammunition depot, 2 ground radar stations, and a logistics route were hit within the same cycle. At the operational level, the disappearance of the A-50U was not simply the loss of a specialized asset, but an abrupt fracture in the long-range early warning layer, the layer that had set the tempo for Russia's entire southern air defense network. A few nights later, the sky where the A-50U had once orbited held only thin civilian flight lines, like threads. No radar disk turning. No deep patrol loops stretching hundreds of kilometers as before. The stealth drone had long since been hauled back into its hangar, silent, as if it had never opened a new chapter in modern war. From a wider vantage point, the strike sent a cold signal when a small, cheap, hard-to-detect platform can slip through an entire strategic air defense system to eliminate high-level command and warning assets. A structure once considered untouchable suddenly looks fragile. Large platforms like the A-50U, the E-3, or airborne command posts are no longer the fixed axis of the sky. They become priority targets. And the question left for air forces is, who will dare to fly deep into their own airspace if even the smallest shadow can change the entire balance?